everyone, it's Ange here with Myrtle and Moss Photography. Today I'm going to be going over how to shoot and edit sparkler exit photos, as well as use my brand new sparkler overlays for Photoshop. Alright, so to get this video started, I'm going to quickly go over my all-time favorite tips and tricks for my sparkler exits. Firstly, I do suggest getting long sparklers for your sparkler exits. Whether you provide them or your clients get them, I do recommend the 18-inch ones. It gives you a little bit more playtime. Number 2, please check ahead of time to ensure that your venue allows it and also that there's no fire bans on. Number 3, these photos work best when your background is nice and dark. So during the summer months when I'm shooting weddings, sometimes it's not actually pitch black by the time that I leave. And while they may be called sparkler exits or sparkler send-offs, they don't actually have to be taken when your couple are leaving for the night. Usually it's when I'm leaving. So I always joke with my clients that we're celebrating that my job is over. So if it's not completely pitch black out at night, I do like to shoot against something dark, for instance, a dark wall. As seen in the photo here, there is some ambient light against the venue, which is totally fine. But if we were shooting into sky, you would actually lose all that beautiful glow from the sparklers. So just make sure that you're shooting against something dark so that those sparklers really pop. Number 4, plan ahead and don't start until everybody is ready to go. So I know sometimes in the evening, everyone's a bit rowdy, or sometimes people can be a bit out of hand. But this is where you really want to step up and use your outdoor voice. Make sure everyone's paying attention. Usually I do get someone to help me, whether that's a bridesmaid or the wedding planner, and usually what I do is get them to hand them out, and then we'll have a few candles passed down the line for people to all light at roughly the same time. This is also why it's really important to have those long sparklers, so that even if they're lit somewhat unevenly, we're hoping that for the most part, they will all be lit at the same time. So before we get them all lit, I do like to tell everyone ahead of time what exactly is going to be happening. We are running on a very short time frame when it comes to these. I mean, with the long sparklers, sometimes you can have up to about a minute and a half, which feels like forever when you've shot with the tiny sparklers before. But just making sure that everyone's prepped and planned ahead before we start lighting. That way you can maximize your shots, play around, and even get a little creative if you'd like. Ensuring everyone is ready to go prior to lighting the sparklers is so important. I always like to tell everyone exactly what's going on. Sometimes it's their first sparkler exit they've ever been a part of, and they're really confused. So typically what I like to do is line the guests up into 2 different rows, and then have the couple run through it or walk through it and kiss in the middle. So sometimes I like to compare it to like a rally prior to a sports game, kind of like a pump up where everyone has their spirit fingers going. So I essentially just explain it like that and say instead of the spirit fingers, they're sparklers. So this being said, just make sure that everyone's aware of where their sparkler is and that no one is going to catch on fire. And one little note to add here, sometimes less is way better. So you do not need 100 people to do a sparkler exit. And while everyone wants to take part and they don't want to feel left out, I have done sparkler exits where the bride and groom got 200 sparklers for all of their guests. And let me tell you, I would not do that again. So sometimes what I like to tell my couples is just get, 20 or so, whether it's just for their closest friends and family or even just for the bridal party. Honestly, you don't need a ton of sparklers to make it look really magical. Obviously, this is up to the bride and groom or your couple. So just be prepared ahead of time. If there are lots of guests, you're going to have to do a lot more planning before those sparklers are lit. And lastly, I'm going to be talking about settings. I will touch base in a little bit here in the video, but for the most part, my f-stop is around 1.4 to 2.2. My ISO I like to keep 3200, 6400, sometimes a little higher if need be, kind of depending on how much ambient light I'm getting prior to the sparklers being lit. And my shutter speed, I don't usually like to go under 250 just because I do move around a lot when I'm shooting. Some people like to use a tripod for these photos. I'm not really a tripod girl. I move way too much. So for my own purposes, I like to keep my shutter speed higher than 1/250th of a second. But that's just personal preference. I don't 100% stick to my own rules sometimes, but for the most part, that is my general settings. So when shooting sparkler exit photos, there's a lot of things that come into play. I don't have one specific number for ISO, shutter speed, and aperture that I use, but I do have kind of guidelines that I use myself. To start, you're going to want to know the limits of your camera and to what extent you can push like your ISO, for instance. My kind of rules for myself, I usually like to have my ISO at around 3200, sometimes 6400. Depending on the lighting scenario, I do know that I can recover a lot of the grain at those ISOs, but just test it out. I wouldn't recommend practicing figuring out what your ISO needs to be or how high you can push it at a wedding. Test at home, just even around your house when it's dark out. So for shutter speed, I usually like to go, I don't like to shoot below 250, 1/250th of a second. I find that I move a lot. And so it's not necessarily my clients that are moving that's the issue. It's the fact that I'm too busy when I'm shooting. So that's kind of the lowest I want to shoot. Sometimes I will shoot at about 200 shutter speed if I need to. For aperture, I really do like the lovely bokeh that sparklers give off. So normally I shoot around 1.4 to 2.2, depending on how many people are in the sparkler photo. Usually I want it to be focused on the couple, but sometimes there's some of their kids or family members that are really close and I want their faces to be in focus too. But typically speaking, my aperture is usually around 1.4 to 2.2 for most scenarios at weddings, unless I'm shooting big group photos. Okay, so this particular photo, I shot at 1/200th of a second, which I already went against what I said, but I was very still when I shot this, so it was okay. My ISO was 4000 and my f-stop was 1.8. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this photo. This is just in Adobe Camera Raw, but you can also edit the same way in Lightroom. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my own preset. You can use any preset, whether it's your own or one that you purchased from someone else. So here's my base preset. For me, it looks a little bit red, so I'm just going to click my less red button in my toolkit. And I'm just going to bring my exposure down a little bit. I want my blacks nice and rich, but I don't want them too dark. So I'm going to bring them up a bit, the shadows. And then I'm going to zoom in here and focus on grain. So I'm going to be applying an overlay at the very end. So what I want my finished photo out of ACR or Lightroom to be as pretty grain free as I can get it. If I do want to add grain back in later, I can certainly do that. But for the sake of this part of the editing, I want to make it as grain free as possible. So what you can do is go over here to your detail tab. It's the same as in Lightroom. This is ACR. And you're going to want to zoom in to about 100%. Okay, so you can see we're at 100% there. So I'm going to increase my luminance to 100% and my color all the way down to 0. So what that does is it kind of brings up the color, the little color blocks that are on skin. I'm just going to move my face here. Okay, so you can see that skin is made up of blocks of color. You can see if I zoom in here even more. Okay, so what I want to do is increase my color until I don't see those color blocks anymore. And I would say that's about good. I'm just going to check. I hope it translates okay on this screen recording. Okay, perfect. But as you can tell, because their luminance is at 100%, they kind of look like they're made out of Play-Doh or something. They look like dolls. So what I want to do, oopsies, is zoom in, and I want to reduce my luminance into an acceptable amount of grain that I'm okay with. So I would say probably about there. I'm going to zoom out and just make sure overall that it's what I'm happy with. And I would say that's good. Okay, so for my sparkler exits, I like to have it so that the whites are nice and bright. The thing about sparklers is a lot of times you will have this fringing going on right here. So if you zoom in, you can see that around the little glows of sparkles, you can see that there's like kind of like a pink purplish cast around there. So what you do is you go on over here to this lens corrections tab. It's the same as in Lightroom. And then here's your slider. So this you can move. You can see that this section we're dealing with the purples, the reds, and the oranges. And then down here we're dealing with the more greens and blues. So sometimes you can get blue fringing around here. But for these sparklers and most sparklers, you will get kind of the purple and red pink hues. So what I'm going to do is just slide this all the way over to red. You can also move these as well to be more specific to the color that you're dealing with. And then you just slide up your purple until those are gone away. So let's see here. That's about good. So the thing is that it will leave you, so instead of, so what it actually does is it just gets rid of that rim around the edge, but it does turn it gray. So I'm okay with a little bit of fringing. I want to make sure that it's not too noticeable that the gray stands out now. So I'd say that's okay. We still have a little bit there, but I'm okay with it. But the thing is when you're dealing with red, I mean, our computers are smart, Photoshop is smart, but it can't tell the difference between red here and then also red on the lips or anywhere else on the skin. So I always like to go back and check that it hasn't caused too much of a problem on my skin tones or around, usually around the mouth or the face. So here we can see like a little bit of gray action here, but honestly from far away that should be okay. I'm just happy that I got rid of that fringing on the sparklers. So if I zoom out here, you probably won't even notice that fringing on her chin. I would say that's good. So I have that at 5. I'm going to take this back. Can you see the fringing that's going on there? So there's no fringing or none of the defringing going on. And then there's with our fix. All right, so I'd say I'm happy with that. I'm going to go back to my sharpening section and maybe just sharpen it up just a little bit more. Okay. So I would say I'm pretty happy with those tones. Now what I'm going to do is open it up into Photoshop, and as soon as you export an image from Lightroom or Photoshop, it automatically turns it into a JPEG or a TIFF. So just keep in mind that any of the major color corrections that you want to do, make sure that you're doing it on a raw file. Sparkler exit photos are usually lower quality photos than photos taken during the day, per se. Let's say. So make sure that all of your major color corrections are done before leaving this step. All right, so now that we've opened up our image into Photoshop, it is a JPEG and it's ready for an overlay. So when you purchase my overlays, it comes with 25 of them. It comes with ones that work for horizontal landscape style photos as well as portrait. So what I do to start is look at the image and see if there's anything that I don't want to cover up in the photo. So for the most part, I like to make sure that there's no major sparkles on someone's face. Sometimes you can strategically place them so it does cover up someone's face. For instance, if someone is looking at the camera and everyone else is looking at the couple, sometimes it can be this kind of weird feeling when there's no eyes on you except for the one person. So you can use these sparklers to strategically cover up someone that you don't want to be looking at the camera. So I'm going to go ahead, and I think this one right here should work good. So one really important thing to do when you're putting the overlay on your image is make sure that you're keeping the ratio exactly how it is. We don't want any of these circles to be turning into ovals, or it will start to look like an overlay versus the nice round bokeh like all the rest of the sparkles in the photo. So what you can do is hit Shift Drag on a PC, which is what I'm on, or Command Shift, I believe, or Command Drag on a Mac. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this full size. If the ratio of your image is different than the overlay, that's okay. You can have it spilling off the edge, not a problem at all. So I think that is good like that. Now what I do just to double check that there's no sparkles covering up parts of the photo that I don't want to be covered up, I go over here to opacity and just bring it down, and I can see where my sparkles are. And let's just say I want to get rid of this one right here. Just for whatever reason, you go over here to your brush tool and then make sure your opacity is 100%. I'm going to click, oopsies. I'm going to click Shift, click, and that takes a sample of that. And I'm just going to increase my hardness here, and I'm just going to paint on top of it. So if there's any other sparkles that I didn't want, I can just paint on top of it. All right. I'll move my face here again. Okay, so now I'm going to actually undo that because I don't need that sparkle gun. I'm going to go up here to my actions. If you have never loaded an action before, first of all, you want to make sure that your panel, your Windows or your actions panel is down. So you hit Window and just make sure that right there actions is selected. So then what you do is wherever you've saved the action to, it will be a .atn file. That's Photoshop action. You go to this little drop down and you click load actions and then search for that file, and boom, it's instantly in your actions folder here. So when you open it up, it will say Myrtle and Moss Sparklers. So you just make sure that your layer here is selected, your sparkler overlay, and click this action right there, Sparkler Overlays, and hit play. And it will do its thing. If your computer is slow or your C drive is very full, this action may take a few seconds. Mine is running good right now, so it's pretty instantaneous, but just be patient if your computer is running a bit slower. So you go over here and we click the hue saturation level. So what I'm wanting to do is make sure that my sparkles blend in with the pre-existing sparklers in my photo. We want to make this as realistic as possible. Now, when we look at these sparklers over here, the brightest parts of the sparklers are pretty much white, and ours have a little bit of color to them. So I want to go in and I want to take out some of that color. So my action includes an already kind of warm tone, but it's fully customizable based on your photos and how you edit. So I'm going to go over here, you click your hue saturation level, or your hue saturation layer right here, and then you go over here under properties, there's this little tab right here. So you just click it once and it will bring you into the hue and saturation slider. So these are the only two things that I play with. Don't play with your brightness at all. So just for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm just going to increase my saturation so I can really see the color here, and then just play with whatever tones will match your image. So here we're kind of cusping orange yellowish, so I'm just going to bring it down to where I think it would kind of blend in. That would probably be good for me. And then I'm going to bring my saturation right down. There we go. So I would actually be pretty happy with that. There we go, and that is it. So now what I do is just flatten my image. And I want to add a finishing grain just so that everything blends in together, because you're likely going to have grain on your initial image. And if you were to zoom into this photo, you would see that the sparklers that we have applied do not have any grain in there. Not super noticeable, but if you're a perfectionist, sometimes it's nice to just really finish your photo off with a bang. So I'm going to go over here and just click finishing grain 1, hit play. It probably won't really show up in this screen recording, but if you were to zoom in onto a full res image, you would definitely notice it. So there we have it. There's one photo start to finish through shooting, editing, and adding an overlay. I'll go ahead and start editing a few more here for you guys as well. All right, so this one's a really good example because it's really dark. There was zero ambient light. It was taken outside when it was pitch black. And as you can tell, we only have these tiny, dinky little sparklers, not a ton of people, a little bit of candlelight, but I was really pushing my camera to the max here. So for this photo, I used f1.6, 250th of a second, and ISO 8000. So I don't mind there being a lot of grain in sparkler exit photos. I think it gives it a bit of character. They're a little bit more raw, and honestly, it was dark in real life, so I don't really care if it's grainy. It kind of adds the warmth and the feeling and the mood to the photo, so I'm okay with it. But I'm just going to show you how to maximize what we can do here on this photo. So I'm going to go ahead and just click my preset. So as you can tell right away, we need to do some exposure changes here. So I'm going to brighten this right up. I'm going to use my toolkit because there's a lot of red in here, and click less red. So I'm going to click my low light noise reduction in my toolkit here. So that just does everything I need without having to go into the panels. And I'm going to drop my temperature a little bit. I just want it a little bit less warm. I'm okay with sparkler exits being pretty warm because they give off a lot of really warm light, so I'm okay with it. I'm all about editing a photo how it looked like in real life. I want you to remember what it was like, and I want your clients to remember what it was like in person. So sometimes I don't really fight the warmth, especially when it comes to really low lit receptions or really yellow or orange lighting in certain areas. So I'm going to increase my highlights and my whites just a little bit to keep them kind of crisp. And I might bump up my tint here a little bit too. Okay. All right, so I would be okay with that. And I'm just going to quickly go in and double check the fringing on my sparklers. Looks like I have a little bit here. I'm going to go to lens corrections and just increase it a bit. There we go. Okay, so now we are good. Make sure that I don't have any grain on. Nope. Okay, now we're ready to open this one up into Photoshop. All right, so now that we've opened up our image into Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and apply an overlay that I think makes the most sense for this photo. So a few things to consider is you want to see where people are in the photo and where sparklers might be. So here, I don't want really any sparklers up here because it doesn't make sense. They have really tiny sparklers, so there would have to be someone on a ladder holding them up here. And there's no arms coming out really close except for on this side. So I'm probably going to have to pick an overlay where I do a little bit of retouching on it. So I'm going to go ahead and click. Let's see here. Let's go with this one. And I'm actually going to flip it around. I'm going to have to get rid of some of these sparklers. That's all right though. So if I want to flip it over, I go Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. And then I'm just going to lower my opacity here so I can see where I don't want there to be sparklers. So I'm okay with this down here because there's an arm there. And maybe with those two right there, they could have just flown off of a sparkler that would be closer to me. And then up here, it doesn't really make sense to have sparkles up there. So I'm just going to actually, while I keep, let's see here. Okay, so it's actually a smart image. That's all right. And just click OK. It just says the smart object must be rasterized, I don't know how to say that, rasterized before proceeding. And that's okay, no problem at all. So I'm just going to lower the opacity again. Then I'm going to go to my brush here at 100%. And I'm just going to go Alt, click, and that just selects the black that we're working with. And I'm just going to get rid of any of the sparklers that I don't want. So this one up here doesn't make sense for this photo. And this one's a little bit distracting. I might get rid of those too. We're going to keep this one really simple. There, I think that should be good actually. And you know what? I'm going to get rid of that one too. Covers up her face and I don't want to do that. Okay, so now we increase to 100%. All right, so now we're ready to apply the action. So we click Sparkler Overlays and play. And there we go. And now we go over to our hue and saturation panel, click up there under properties and just change our hue here. So it's a little bit more on the reddish side. I'd be happy with that. So when you purchase my overlay pack, you also get individual sparklers. So it can be the final little detail to make a photo look that much better. So one thing I want to reiterate over and over again is to make sure that they look real. So when you're choosing individual sparklers, make sure you pick one that matches the depth of field that you're working with. You can tell that these ones would be further away and these sharper ones would be parts of your photos that are in focus. So probably the ones that your couple are holding on to would be the sharper ones. And then in the background, or as people got more blurry in the background, you'd pick one of these ones with a bit more bokeh to them. So you apply these the same way as you would the other overlays. And it's kind of nice because you can add more than one at once. So I will go ahead and show you this. Oh, and just making a little note here, all of my overlays are actual sparklers that I captured in the comfort of my own home. So these are real sparklers that we're dealing with, which is why they do look so convincing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pick, I think, this one, and keeping the aspect the same, holding the ratio. I don't want it too much bigger than the original ones. I just want a bit more pizzazz. Okay, so it's just at 100% right now, but I'm going to lower it just to make sure that it's right where I want it to be. So it's right on top of where the original sparkle is actually coming from the sparkler. Okay, so I'll leave that at 100%. Now I'll go in here and pull, I think, this bad boy right here. Okay, you can turn them whichever way you want. I think that should be good. Yeah, maybe like that. Okay, and just to make sure I'm in the right place, I go over here and I can just test like that. So that's perfect. So I want to keep these both at 100%. I think these are the only two that I'm going to do. I could add more in the background, but honestly, I think that they are fine. Actually, for the sake of this, I'm going to add another one for you guys. Let's add this one right here to this fellow in the background. And we're actually going to keep it small. I don't want it to be too crazy. There we go. Okay. Perfect. All right, so now what I want to do is click the first layer and then shift click or command click on a Mac. I'm on a PC and go merge layers. So now those are all one layer, as you can see. All right, and then we're going to go to our sparkler overlay action and just hit play. Perfect. Look at that. And honestly, the color and everything is, I think, pretty good. Let me just zoom in here. I'm happy with that. There we go. Super easy. Okay, I love this one. This one's a lot of fun. So here's a good example of one with a lot more light. We have ambient light in the background, a lot more sparklers, and we have much bigger sparklers than our last one. And she's so freaking adorable. I absolutely love this photo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and apply my preset. Like I said before, it doesn't matter whose presets you use, or if you use your own, or if you don't use presets at all, that's okay. So for this particular image, I used ISO 6400, f 2.0 and 320 shutter speed. For the most part, I shoot my sparklers on a 35 or 50 millimeter lens. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my preset. Whoa, that's a lot of red. So I'm going to click less red and low light noise reduction. Okay, then I'm going to go up here to exposure, increase it. And then I'm going to drop my temperature down here just to bring those whites back a little bit more. And increase my highlights and my whites a little bit there too. Okay, just play with my tint just a bit. Okay, and I would be pretty darn happy with this photo. Just a reminder that before you apply any overlays, you're going to want to do any of the skin retouching or any other modifications that you do want to do to the image. Just make sure that you do it before applying an overlay in the photo. All right, so here we go. Now that it's in Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and pick an overlay that I think would look good for this photo. So we have a lot more going on in here, so we can actually go pretty heavy on the overlay. There's a couple things that I don't want to cover up in this photo, and that would be the faces. As much as they're blurry and they're in the front, I don't want to cover those up too much. I think that they're funny, and there's a few other people looking at the camera as well for this one, so let's try to keep them in the photo if we can. All right, so let's see what's going to work for this photo. I actually think this one right here might be good. Let's give it a shot anyways. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just lower my opacity to see what we might be covering up, and I'm just looking at the faces here. And to me, it actually looks pretty darn good. Okay, so let's leave it at 100%. I'm going to go up to my sparkler overlays action and hit play. Perfect. All right, so now let's go to our hue saturation layer and up here to properties. And for the sake of this, I'm just going to increase my saturation a bit just to play with tones. And these are a lot more on the red side of things. I would say that is probably pretty good. Let's give this one a little more color. I think, let's see here. I think that'll do right there. So this one I did increase the color a little bit more. I still have my true whites on the brightest parts of the sparklers, so they do blend in with the ones that are naturally occurring. However, this photo in general has a little bit more saturation than some other ones, so I don't want these to stand out too much by being too bright. So by increasing the saturation, they just kind of blend in a little bit more to the photo. So here we're maintaining the faces that we don't want to cover up. This girl already had a sparkle on her face, so that's not our doing. Overall, I think this looks great actually. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten it and then click finishing grain. And there we go. All right, so that wraps it up, guys. Thanks so much again for all of your continued support. Please feel free to reach out if there's any topics that you want me to cover, and I'm looking forward to coming out with a lot more online content for you guys. So thanks again, and take care.